Hello and welcome to my Oracle Think Tank deck profile. So this is based on the P-Clan collection set. I have been saying that I'll be putting up more content around P-Clan collection. So here's my first Oracle Think Tank related deck profile. And with this, we have a massive buff for the Susanoo deck. So I'm just going to go through a few things. And in addition, I played this in BRO, which is why I don't really want to unveil it just yet. And in BRO, I managed to reach top 8. So that was the Asia-Oceania region. For the starter, I'm playing Godhawk Ichibiyoshi. So this card has to be played if you're playing certain cards in this list because you need the name. But otherwise, the V-Series starters all do the same thing anyway. If you're not playing stuff like Tsukiyomi Pieces or Sai, then you don't really need this card. Then 4 copies of Susanoo, so he's really good. He can punish your opponent if they grade stall. And if you think you can close the game with it, then you can ride up. So he's there as a looming threat if the grade 2 game keeps dragging on. And the deck does have a good grade 2 game as well. However, the on-place ability is actually very good in Premium. So it's not an on-place draw like Scarlet Witch Coco or Fromage or Otaka Sahime. So because of that, it's not quite as popular in Premium. But I think the on-place draws are somewhat overrated. I mean, Coco is a really good one because it's free, but in the case of Fromage and Otaka Sahime, although you're getting the +1 extra on that Counterblast, it is also the case that the Counterblast resource in this deck can get kind of funny, so you don't always want to have on-ride draws anyway, so it's not like that much of a loss if you place a card that doesn't draw. Obviously it can help with cards like Momo who require discard, but in the case of Susanoo as well, like I'm playing G Guardians that draw and they all have Counterblast costs attached to them. I'm playing Fio, which also has a Counterblast cost, so my Counterblast costs are just going to be reallocated elsewhere anyway. So I'm not quite as bummed about missing on the draw. I think the on-play skill, the fact it's free and I get to scry 2 is pretty good. So the scry 2 is basically just a case of you look at top 2, you can put them on top or bottom, and you can leave up to 1 on top and reveal it to your opponent. I would be careful not to reveal cards like Amaterasu though, because it's mandatory. So if you reveal this, you have to bind it from top of your deck, which isn't good because if you stride over, you're not getting the 10k crit anyway. So that's just something to look out for. But otherwise, you're just going through more of your deck anyway, and you can find criticals. So that's very good because it can help set up your Dragon King stride, which the new stride came out, which is very similar in effect to Susanoo. And it also can help you decide if you want to go into Momo, because sometimes you make a judgment call based on what's on top of your deck, and you might determine, okay, you know what, I'll go into Momo because I know what's coming. Especially if it's an over trigger. If it's an over trigger, you'd rather go into Momo usually than going into the Dragon King. So it's good for this as well. It's free, so that's really nice. And you can only do these sort of lines of play because Susanoo is an on-play on Vanguard, so it's before the stride step, which is why I find it so helpful. Then there's 4 Ghosts and Amaterasus. So Amaterasu, same reason that I've explained in other videos, it's just a good card to reveal, and the deck does a lot of revealing. 10k crit to Vanguard from the early game onwards, anytime is very helpful. 3 costs of Popa because you need a finisher. This deck doesn't have like a reliable amount of aggression. It does rush from the early game, but then it doesn't do multi-attacks and things, or effective multi-attacks. So you do need your guard restricts to even have a chance of closing games against some of the hardest defense decks in the game. And then we've got 4 copies of Diviner Kurokazuchi. He's good from early to late game. It can basically set up your triggers and you get your criticals off and everything. So he's very nice. He's also filtering through your deck so you can find stuff. And the Soul Blast cost isn't really that bad because the deck is actually much better now with Soul Management than it used to be thanks to the new stride. It just does a very kind of like subtle change in which you can manage things better than before. Then we've got 4 copies of Fio. So Fio is really good because if you place her, you can draw a card. However, if you have a non-mutant drop zone, you have to place on top, so just be careful with that. Because I did have a moment, unfortunately, in top 8, I did something that was a bit illogical, which was guarding with Tetramegas. I was lacking in sleep, so I'd made a little blunder, which is a bit out of the norm. Unless I thought about it, which I didn't think about it. I did forget the fact that I've just made myself mandatory guard with it, so a mandatory put it on top even. So I should have guarded with Psychic Bed. But the thing is that you have to be careful with playing with things. So in the early game, when you discard cards, I would just try and discard the quick shield if you went second, or Amaterasu, because Amaterasu is good to put onto your deck. Otherwise, I would try and avoid dropping your normal units in most cases. So, or you can potentially drop Ichikishima, but Ichikishima is also a good card to call early game, so you're probably less likely to do that. So Fio is a very, very good card. She can help you get your 10k crit on Vanguard because of this. So very good synergies. She also recycles normal units, so the fact that she's actually putting normal units on top of your deck can also be good if in the later game you've run out of Popos, which is partly why I run 3 copies of Popo anyway, because I can always just try and get back with her anyway, so it's not too bad. Then there are 4 copies of Ichikishima. If you reveal Ichikishima, you basically do the same thing as Amaterasu, you give 10k to Vanguard. She can be used both offensively and defensively, and she also helps with rushing in the game, so very good. Also helping to stack your critical triggers. So if you have excess cards in your hands, you can basically just set up your kill turn. Then 4 copies of Amano Murakumo. So this card is very good because he can search for any grade 3. So not just Susanoo, your main boss that you want to ride into, but also Goddess-san Amaterasu, because Goddess-san Amaterasu can also give 10k crit to Vanguard. And also your Hill Guardians, because your Hill Guardians can help you with defense early game, and also just with G-Guarding later. And also your Popos, because that's your win condition. So you've got a lot of good targets with this card. And he's also a consistent 13k beta because you do a lot of revealing. So this makes the grade 2 game more effective. Not only can you potentially get your 10k crits Amaterasu, but you can also just hit with big numbers like Ichikishima, Kurokazuchi, and having the 13k. So you're usually you're doing well with the grade 2 game. Then there's 1 copy of Tetramagus. So Tetramagus can stack a critical. She's there to just, well, I had a spare slot. I had a normal Perfect Guard originally here, but I took the normal Perfect Guard out, which is the Oracle keyword one, Amata Hikone. And I decided to replace it because I was running out of critical triggers. Like, I had games where I just couldn't push my opponent from 3 or 4 to 6 because I just had no crits left, or I couldn't draw 2 Popos. So she's there just in case. You can always go Fio to Tetra and then use Tetra after. It's 2 counterblast cost though if you go in that chain, but that's fine. It's still there as an out. And then we have 4 copies of Sai. So this is the reason why we play Godhawk Ichibiyoshi, because then this way we can make use of Crescent Moon Tsukuyomi, who requires Godhawk Ichibiyoshi in your soul. So Sai has a good second skill which can be used in any deck, which is that you can soul charge a grade 2 or less from your field, and there's going to be a lot of junk grade 2 or less because, like I mentioned earlier, excess cards can be used. Like Ichikishima, you can just use her later game to stack your deck. You can use Fio for the sake of recycling cards. So you will find cases where you're basically calling grade 2s, but they're not being used for the attacks. They're just being used just so you can use their effects. And she kind of makes it a bit more efficient because she can just eat that wasted grade 2 they use purely for the effect, and then make use of those cards elsewhere. So it almost becomes like a free card because you're going to waste those cards anyway. So she's quite efficient for that reason. And she can help you get to your critical triggers as well and hopefully close the game. Also finding heals and so on if you're on your first try turn, she's good for that. Also finding over trigger if you want to have a shot at the over trigger. So she's very good. Soul charging as well, which isn't really as much an issue anymore. So the soul charge reason isn't as important. Maybe I should consider playing Uraili or something if soul charging is getting this easy now. But then we've got the 1 copy of Crescent Moon Tsukuyomi. So just a 1 copy because it's searchable. I have basically 9 ride targets, which is the Amno Murakumo, Sai, and Tsukuyomi. And although this deck doesn't play Half Moon Tsukuyomi, you can add anything to your hand with this ride chain. So if you don't add Half Moon, or you don't have Half Moon in hand, you can just discard any other card like Quick Shield or Amaterasu, which, by the way, Amno Murakumo also discards. So we have 9 grade 1 ride targets in this deck that can potentially discard Amaterasu, and that's of course assuming you have Amaterasu in your hand, and they can both add Amaterasu to hand anyway because they check top 5. So you can discard Amaterasu and then you can ride Fio, the grade 2, and then you can basically draw a card and then stack Amaterasu back from your drop zone on top of your deck, and then use one of many other reveal skills to then buy the top card and have 10k crit. So it happens in a fair amount of games. So this deck is really interesting with all the synergies you can do. It's very fun early game. Then we have the Overtrigger. So, as mentioned, if you reveal with Momo, you can potentially... Sorry, not Momo, Susanoo. You can potentially just stack with Momo as well. Then we have the 4 Psychic Birds. So Psychic Bird is very good because it's draw 1. So if you're not happy with your hand, you can just use that. Then we have 3 Celestial Wish Choto. I didn't have enough space to play a 4th copy for my Stratasys. Obviously, if anything got cut, then I'd probably play the 4th copy of that. Then we've got 4 Divine Sword Kusanagi, Sentinel Critical. So previously, I was mixing with like 2 of them, 1 Draw PG and 1 Perfect Guard in my playtesting. But then I was getting annoyed with lacking criticals, so I put Tetramagus in. And I was starting to kind of feel it more with just playing criticals altogether. Like, part of the reason I was playing Sentinel, big reason in fact, was because of my fear of overtriggers. But I'm just getting fed up now of Battle Door abilities because they're also a bit tough. And also early game, like discarding to guard something in the early game when I could just drop 1 card. And then still playing more crits in your deck and freeing room to play other stuff. Like, in the end, I just felt, you know what, I'll just do 4 crits. I'll just try this out. And it's been fine for the most part. I also did the same thing in my Regalia deck, but I did get over-triggered. Well, there's another reason for why I decided to play Sentinel Criticals in Regalia, which I'll cover in my deck profile for that as well. There's 4 copies of the heals, so you can search this with Amlin Rokuma, of course, and also you can give your 10k to your Vanguard or -2 crits, so it helps you survive. The thing is, this card wasn't as good before because in Susanoo, the problem is that there are like no good first strides, but Susanoo himself has a very good skill. So if your opponent rides grade 3 and then you ride Susanoo, you sometimes, well, most of the time you don't even want to stride. So you just end up preferring Susanoo for the safety. But now with this heal trigger, which previously you would have wanted to keep in your hand because you wanted G-Guard to get Ichikishima off because you have like no good first strides, or reliable first strides even, because Momo is a risky card. Now that we've got the Dragon King stride, which is a safer first stride that doesn't deplete your hand or your resources, and you're not wasting Ichikishima, which is basically just a draw 2 and that's it for the turn. With the Dragon King, I don't feel bad about dropping this early game now because I can just stride Dragon King and I've already got Generation Break and it's free as well, which is another thing. So Susanoo costs a Counterblast, Ichikishima costs a Counterblast, so if your opponent happens to damage die or you damage an OT, then you can mess up your Counterblast resources and then suddenly you're not doing Ichikishima in your turn 4, which is very bad because then you're just getting close to deck out and you're not making progress. Your opponent could probably stay on low damage. So they can all hurt in many ways and then you just waste your critical triggers that you're drawing and drive checking into. Then we have the G zone, so Momo. She's good as a finisher. That's the only time I really use her, is if I think I can just win the game straight up. Or I would have her there in case of matchups where I don't want to call units like Link Joker, although I don't think I've actually had much of a chance to ever... I don't think I've even tried using Momo on Link Joker. I feel like every time I fall against Link Joker, might have just been... No, I did play against one build. Okay, so it's kind of funny. I have played against Link Joker a handful of times with Regalia, but with Oracle Think Tank, I don't think I've been playing really with the Momo stuff, so I've not really experienced this, but one of the reasons why people like this card is because it's good against Link Joker. And the last round in AO, I did go against Link Joker, so I could technically have used in that, but it was deleter, it wasn't the locking type of Link Joker. But the game kind of ended in a weird way because basically my opponent did like it was really, really crazy cool deck where he had like the new stride from P-Clan Collection, which can basically call off top 7 and he would just get given and then he would just keep on like doing loads and loads of multi-attacks. It got to a point where basically I just kept on surviving until deck out. So he reached 1 in deck and then I went to my turn, I passed and I ended. So it's different, but generally this card is there if you're worried about the lock mechanic. So I've barely experienced actually using this in practice. Then we've got 2 Dragon King. So he's free, he has no counterblast cost, which means your resources are better. He's also helping you charge your Generation Break. I actually had a game where I won with this on second stride. So I used it first stride, then used it second stride, which was my first time doing it that way because I've never really, I've always kind of gone Ichikishima usually with this, or I just, in other cases, I find that my deck is too small for me to actually use a second stride. So it's usually been either one of the 2 reasons why I never use this card second stride, but I found a game where I actually got to use the second stride without losing my entire deck because it's mandatory. you have to actually, you can't go up to the amount of cards in G-Zone. So if your G-Zone gets too big and you go into this and use a skill, you have to draw all those cards equal to your G-Zone +2. You can't do less than. So this can be a very double-edged sword. And because of that, I still play the one Karma Susanoo because he's a 5k crit. So, and he doesn't force you to draw, although he does have the recovery draw ability. So I still play him for that reason. And the Dragon King, you just have to be kind of careful if you use it later game, but otherwise he's so good as a first stride because you're basically getting your generation break and you're getting your triggers. And you're calling normal units. Another thing you have to look out for is if you play normal perfect guards, you have to call the normal perfect guards. So that's part of the reason I took the normal perfect guard out of my deck. But then also, the other thing to look out for is if you call Abuna Murakumo, you cannot use the skill because you have to place from hand. It's very easy to forget that you're placing them from deck, so just be careful with that as well. And remember to also shuffle because this is a mandatory shuffle. Normally when you look at top 3 and you call and add things to hand, it doesn't quite click in your head at first that you're supposed to shuffle your deck. So that's just something to get into habit of because that's an easy mistake to make as well. So then Karma Susanoo, 5k crit. He's just there for safety and also to try and push for game. So he's there if my opponent's hand is just not good, basically. Then there's 4 copies of Ichikishima. Ichikishima is basically a draw 2 and also able to do guard restrict, so this is your main finisher to try and win games with. That's assuming your opponent plays like Grand Blue or something that has good defense, because you really need to use that Popo Ichi combo to beat some of the decks in the game. Then we've got 4 copies of Amaterasu, the G-Guard. It's a free soul charge and check top card. You can't do the reveal thing, so you're not going to be able to use Goddess of the Sun or Ichikishima. But she's good for the fact that if you don't have Counterblast, you can use her. Or if you know that you're not going to be relying on Ichi or Amaterasu anyway, then you might as well just use her then and there. So she's still got her applications. Then 2 copies of Octagonal Magus. So she's very good and very underrated because you can set up the top of your deck sometimes with Amaterasu. And then you can just use her to reveal things in a certain order. So if you have the top cards, Ichikishima or Amaterasu, or if you plan to take a damage trigger and then reveal Amaterasu or Ichi after, you can now do this because before you couldn't, because this card forced you to draw a card and then reveal, whereas this card reveals the first card. So she's really good for that. She gives you options now, so there's more flexibility in the G-Zone because of this card's existence. And in my case, I've actually used her just to get random 15k shield when I've been desperate. I've just have to guess the grade if I want to draw, but normally I just guess grade 1 and 2, unless of course I look at my drop zone and figure out some ratios and realize, oh, actually, never mind. But I think grade 1 2 is usually safer because if you see a trigger, you can just go for the damage check anyway, rather than adding to your hand. And if you see a grade 3, well, it could be a heal trigger or it could be Amaterasu anyway, and Amaterasu will just get binded. So in many cases, I think the safer grades to randomly pick are grade 1 and 2, in most cases anyway. And then 2 Battle Sister Babrois. So Battle Sister Babrois also reveals, also draws as well. Use it on the smaller attacks, usually. It's better that way. And then there's Dismal. Dismal's there to protect stuff that you need. So that's basically it for my deck profile. So yeah, thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want to see more Oracle Think Tank or Genesis related content. And until then, I will see you guys later. Bye bye.